Just navigated the intricate landscape of Durkheim's take on suicide, a real mind-bender in itself. Now let's pivot to another cornerstone of his work, Les formes élémentaires de la vie religieuse. Before we get lost in the thicket of interpretations, let's try to cut through the noise and ask the most direct question. What did Durkheim himself think were the absolute must-know, game-changing ideas in this book? Luckily for us, he gave us a heads-up back in 1913. He pointed to two big ones: the dynamogenic quality of religion and the duality of human nature. These aren't just fancy terms, they're supposed to be the heart of the matter, according to Durkheim himself. So let's unpack what he meant by these. Okay, first up, the dynamogenic quality. Think of it like this. Durkheim wasn't just saying religion makes you feel good or gives you answers about the universe. No, he was saying religion is a power source. It's got juice, it provides real energy for action. Imagine being with your God, not just thinking about it, but truly connected. Durkheim says you'd feel different, more confident, bursting with life, enthusiastic in a way you don't normally experience. You'd have more grit, more resilience, capable of doing greater things. But here's the catch, and this is crucial. This power only works if the God is strongly represented in your mind, and if everyone believes it. It needs collective faith. Your personal belief has to be part of the group belief to be truly effective. It's like needing a crowd to cheer you on to lift your game. Second pillar, the duality of human nature. This sounds like old philosophical stuff: body versus soul, flesh versus spirit, sensations versus concepts. But Durkheim takes it further. It's not just a distinction, it's a deep conflict. Our thoughts, our moral actions, they often clash with our raw feelings, our instincts. We can never fully align both sides of ourselves. We're always at war within. Think Augustine wrestling with his desires. But Durkheim doesn't leave us hanging. He connects this inner turmoil back to society. Society gets inside our heads, and in doing so it elevates us beyond our mere physical selves. So we become two beings, one tied to our body, our desires, the other reflecting society, reason, morality. Of course, these two are going to fight. One wants instant gratification, the other demands self-control for the sake of the group. It's like having a rebellious teenager and a wise parent living inside you. Durkheim sees this tension as fundamental, rooted in social forces. And the job of sociology, to figure out how these social forces shape our actions, especially when we're torn between our two natures. Now, where did these powerful ideas come from? Did they pop up fully formed? Not quite. Let's rewind the clock. Back in the early days, like his lectures at the Lycée de Sens in the mid-1880s, Durkheim was still finding his footing as a sociologist. No hints of these later themes yet. Then, looking at his early reviews of Spencer and Guyot, we see some familiar seeds. He was already skeptical of Taylor's simple animism, thinking God was just a minor detail hiding much bigger social truths. He saw religion less as complex belief systems and more as habits, customs, something deeply ingrained. Science would eventually explain things rationally, but religion, he thought, would stick around as a kind of social rulebook, a discipline. But here's the key point. Even in these early writings, there's no mention of totemism. It's almost like he's before ethnography, not yet deeply engaged with the actual practices of different cultures. And notice the language: obligation, constraint. Religion is seen as something that imposes duties, rules, limitations. The exciting, energizing, dynamogenic side. Not even a whisper yet. This focus on constraint really carries through his major work, De la division du travail social. Even though it's a landmark text, it's surprisingly detached from detailed ethnographic studies of religion. Totemism. Just a brief mention. The language? Duty, obligation, constraint. Religion, in this view, is all about making people do things they don't want to do, giving up stuff, sacrificing time and resources. Durkheim even quotes Fustel de Coulanges, basically saying, "Hey Fustel, you can't just start with the religious idea and build society from there. It's the social arrangements that create the religious idea. Beliefs and feelings, they seem secondary, almost like side effects of the real social structures." Fast forward to 1895 with Les Règles de la méthode sociologique. Here constraint becomes the defining feature of any social fact. The individual is constantly facing forces that dominate them, forces they must submit to. Religion, for Durkheim, is a prime example of how individuals represent this state of dependence to themselves. Stephen Lukes nailed it when he called Durkheim's early take on religion largely formal and rather simplist. It's a neat, clean picture, but maybe missing some crucial dimensions. So, if the early view was so constrained, when did the shift happen? Durkheim himself pointed to a pivotal moment around 1895. He famously recalled it as a revelation, a dividing line in his thought. Suddenly he felt he had the keys to understand religion sociologically. What triggered this? He credited his studies in religious history, particularly Robertson Smith's work. Smith's Religion of the Semites was a big deal then. But here's the puzzle. Durkheim never actually spelled out what this revelation was. What exactly did Smith or his school teach him that flipped the switch? And even more curiously, looking at Durkheim's writings right after 1895, there's no clear sign he'd fully bought into Smith's specific arguments. The connection seems fuzzy, almost mythical. It's like he had an epiphany, but we're left wondering what lightning struck. While we're waiting for Durkheim's supposed revelation, let's look at what was actually influencing him around that time. Enter James George Frazer and his massive The Golden Bough. In his Suicide Study from 1897, Durkheim clearly draws on Frazer's first edition. What's the big idea there? Frazer talks about this recurring myth across cultures. A man-god who gets sacrificed so his spirit can pass on to his successor. Durkheim latches onto this as the perfect example of the altruistic suicide he identified among certain groups. But here's a twist. Frazer himself later denied this idea came directly from Robertson Smith. In the second edition of Golden Bough, he pulled back from that link. More importantly, the core idea of the man-god sacrifice, while powerful, was ripped out of Smith's broader context. Smith saw it as part of a vital mystical unity within the community that needed constant renewal through rituals. That rich sociological background, missing entirely in Durkheim's suicide analysis. It's like borrowing a powerful engine but forgetting the chassis it belongs to. This Frazerian influence continued in Durkheim's early contributions to L'Année sociologique. Take his essay on incest from 1898. Here he finally starts to grapple with totemism, acknowledging its importance. But again he leans heavily on Frazer's earlier work on totemism. For Durkheim, totemism isn't unique, it's just one example of the huge overarching institution of taboo. And what's taboo all about? Rules, prohibitions, obligations, sanctions, constraints. See a pattern here? The language is still dominated by limits, restrictions, what you shouldn't do. Even though he's talking about totemism now, the dynamogenic spark, the idea of religion lifting us up, the duality of human nature as a social explanation, still nowhere to be found. It's like he's describing the fences and gates of a park, but hasn't yet talked about the joy of playing in it. Then comes 1899, and things get interesting. Durkheim writes in Cisse defining religious phenomena. Scholars reading this piece start to disagree. Was this a breakthrough? Pickering thinks so, linking it directly to those Smith insights Durkheim claimed were revelatory. But Luke sees it as a bit tentative, a first, rather groping attempt. What does Durkheim actually say here? He defines religion by obligatory beliefs. Notice the emphasis on obligatory, distinguishing it from science, which involves voluntary beliefs, and from law or morality, which involve obligatory actions. It's a step focusing on belief, but it still feels incomplete. There's a nagging suspicion here, hinted at by the text. Durkheim might still not fully grasp Smith's nuanced distinction between ritual and myth. Remember Smith's ritual theory of myth? He argued that fixed, obligatory rituals came first, and myths were later stories derived from those rituals. In 1899, Durkheim is emphasizing obligatory beliefs, but he hasn't quite sorted out the relationship between ritual practice and belief in the way Smith did. And another gap, he still struggles to clearly separate religion from magic, despite Smith having offered a powerful sociological distinction between the two earlier on. It feels like he's getting closer, but maybe not quite there yet. By 1902, Durkheim starts to sound disappointed. He reads the ethnographic literature and sighs, "Why do everyone keep focusing on the negative stuff? All the thou shalt nots, the taboos, the restrictions." He wishes they'd paid more attention to the positive side, the communal feasts, the dances, the sacrifices where people give things, not just refrain from doing things. And this shift becomes even more pronounced in his lectures at the Sorbonne, in 1906 to 1907. Suddenly, religion isn't just about rules anymore. It's described as representing a force that lifts the individual up, strengthens the life within them. We're seeing a clear move away from the language of obligation and constraint towards that dynamogenic quality and the duality of human nature. It's like switching from a black and white photo to a vibrant color image. But why this dramatic change? What happened between 1899 and 1906 to make Durkheim pivot so completely? To understand this shift, we need to zoom in on James Frazer again, specifically his evolving thoughts on totemism. Initially, in his 1887 book, Frazer was mostly descriptive, noting how totemism might affect ecosystems. Then, in the first edition of Golden Bough, he proposed his first theory. Totemism arose because primitive people deposited their souls into animals or plants for protection, explaining why they revered their totems and wouldn't kill them. This animistic idea resonated with Tyler's influence. But then in early 1897, Frazer gets a letter. It's from Baldwin Spencer, describing the Arunta people of Australia eating their own totems during a ceremony called Intikuma. Boom! This seemed to confirm Robertson Smith's idea of a primitive totemic sacrament, a shared meal reinforcing kinship. Frazer, who had previously been skeptical because Smith's only example was flimsy, was intrigued. This Australian evidence felt solid. Frazer and Spencer quickly teamed up, Frazer helping publish Spencer's work, and the stage was set for Frazer's next big idea. Frazer's second theory, proposed in late 1898, was radically different. Forget animism. Totemism, he argued, was basically an ancient economic planning system. Each clan was assigned a resource, say, kangaroos or a type of bush tucker, and their job was to manage and multiply that resource. To do this effectively, they'd naturally identify with the species, learning its secrets. Simple utilitarianism. Frazer even suggested Spencer's Intikuma confirmed Smith's sacrament idea, arguing the eating ritual imparted the totem's life force. Spencer agreed, but added a crucial caveat. Maybe the prohibition against killing the totem came first, and the exogamy rule was bolted on later. Frazer ran with this, developing his famous evolutionary sequence. Magic, coursing nature, comes first, then religion, propitiating powers, and finally science, understanding nature. This neat progression became central to the second edition of the Golden Bough, published in 1900. That 1900 edition of the Golden Bough caused a stir. The subtitle changed to A Study of Magic and Religion, signaling Frazer's tougher stance. He boldly claimed Jewish festivals like Purim reflected ancient Near Eastern fertility rites, and even suggested Jesus was just another dying and reviving god like Osiris or Adonis. Predictably, this upset religious groups and drew fire from academics like Moses Gaster. Frazer's popularity soared with the public, but many in his own field turned against him. One of the most significant opponents emerged from Oxford, R.R. Marett. Marett had been influenced by William James's pragmatism, thanks to his friend F. C.S. Schiller. In 1900, Marett published Pre-Animistic Religion. He argued against Tyler's idea that animism was the earliest form of religion. Instead, Marett proposed a pre-existing feeling of awe and wonder at the mysterious aspects of nature. When reason failed to explain this, humans started personifying it. Totemism, for Marett, was a rationalization of this deeper, older religious impulse. He also criticized the simplistic psychology behind Frazer's magic theory. 4 years later, in 1904, Marett went after Frazer's entire framework head-on, specifically his division of magic, religion, and science. Why, Marett asked, does Frazer treat magic so differently? Because Frazer saw sympathetic magic just as an extension of basic associationist psychology. But Marett, drawing heavily from James, rejected this. Associationism doesn't explain how we create new ideas or reasoning. Magic, Marett argued, requires something more, a will to believe. You know it's irrational, but you still go along with it, convinced it works. It's a kind of faith, self-justifying because it feels effective. Magic, he said, is like a negotiation between persons projecting your will onto another will. How do people understand this mysterious force? Marett pointed to Codrington's work on Melanesia and the concept of mana. Mana is the power behind magic and religion. People try to obtain and control it. Because mana is non-intrinsic and contagious, it can jump from person to object, leading to deification and the belief that objects have wills we can influence. This directly challenged Frazer's view of magic as mere sympathetic association. Across the channel, Durkheim was watching all this Frazer/Marett drama unfold, and he was deeply concerned. Why? Because Frazer's arguments were hitting Durkheim's own work squarely. First, Frazer denied the close link between totemism and exogamy, a bedrock assumption for Durkheim. Second, Frazer suggested powerful social prohibitions, like totem taboos, were rationally constructed, contradicting Durkheim's view that they stemmed from a collective unconscious and that primitive societies weren't permissive. Third, and perhaps most threatening, Frazer offered an economic explanation for totemism, a teleological explanation. Durkheim had spent years in Les Règles arguing against such explanations, insisting that needs and desires don't create social facts, only accelerate or slow down their development. So in 1902, Durkheim published Sur le totémisme. His mission? To fight back. He needed to rescue totemism as a genuine religious and social institution, counteracting Fraser's claims that it was just magical economics. He needed new tools, a new narrative strategy. How did Durkheim plan to win this intellectual battle? He pulled out some classic Victorian anthropological tools. First, he invoked evolution. He reminded readers that long before Spencer and Gillen, countless examples showed totemism and exogamy going hand in hand. If the Arunta data was problematic, maybe it was a later, corrupted version of totemism. He even argued the Arunta, despite being inland, could have a long history and be relatively advanced, using uniformitarian evolution to argue their system wasn't necessarily primitive. Then he tackled the tricky issue of Arunta traditions, describing a past of clan endogamy followed by a reform into exogamous phratries. Durkheim dismissed this using Smith's ritual theory of myth. Traditions are just stories people invent to make sense of current practices. His real reason? The phratry was too central to Arunta life to be a recent addition. It had to be original. It's like saying, if this story explains why we do things now, maybe the story itself is secondary to the action. Okay, so if the phratry was original, how did clan endogamy arise? Durkheim cooked up a scenario. Maybe the Arunta once had matrilineal descent combined with patrilocal residence, living with the father's group. This setup was unstable, requiring kids to shuttle between groups. Eventually, a revolution shifted to patrilineal descent, forcing clans to split and integrate children into the father's phratry, allowing clan endogamy. Now, what about the weird tolerance for eating totems? Durkheim blamed the weakening social structure caused by this shift. He cleverly used the idea of consubstantiality, clan member and totem being alike, to argue the opposite of Fraser. Earlier, more stable societies couldn't have eaten their totems. The traditions about ancestors eating totems? Just elaborations of the actual ritual consumption part of the Intikuma ceremony. And the real sacrament? Durkheim declared it was this ceremonial consumption, not in a magical sense, but as Smith intended it, a genuine mystical religious act reinforcing the bond. But wait, if it's a sacrament, what makes it work? What's the underlying principle? Durkheim argued the sacred quality of totems lies not in the totem itself, but in something impersonal, an anonymous force. This sounds remarkably like Marat's pre-animistic religion, though Marat used it to critique Fraser. For Durkheim, the totem is just a sincere point to this deeper force. What are the characteristics of this force? On one hand, it's external, imposing rules and duties, just like Marat's magic. But, Durkheim added the crucial positive element. This force is also secourable. It's helpful. It elevates us, strengthens our inner life. Think of Smith's ancient Semites again, feeling confident, friendly with their god. This leads to what Durkheim called activity vivifiante, a vitalizing energy drawn from belief, giving strength to face life's challenges. And where does this happen best? In the group, when society acts within us, lifting us up. Society isn't just outside constraining us, it's inside empowering us. Where did Durkheim get this idea of religion as a source of vitalizing energy? The text suggests a fascinating link to American pragmatism, specifically William James. The very phrase, dynamogenic quality, appears to originate with the French psychologist Charles Ferret. Ferret did experiments showing various stimuli, heat, light, sound, could temporarily boost muscle strength. James was fascinated and wrote about it in his Principles of Psychology. Later, in Varieties of Religious Experience, James applied this concept. He described Augustine's conversion as overcoming a divided self, needing that explosive dynamogenic intensity to finally break free and embrace the higher good. James argued we should judge such experiences pragmatically, by their value for life. Durkheim clearly picked up on this. In Formes Élémentaires, after discussing religious experiences providing proof, he explicitly references James's book, agreeing that these experiences have demonstrative value, like judging a tree by its fruit. Now, Durkheim wasn't a pragmatist, he even lectured against them later, but he clearly borrowed this emphasis on the practical energizing power of religious experience. So, let's pull this thread together. We see a transformation in Durkheim's thinking. Early on, perhaps reflecting the anxieties of the Third Republic, he was looking for ways to encourage citizens to submit to and integrate within a strong society, almost like a new kind of law. He found potent metaphors in Frey's concept of taboo. But then, perhaps shaped by the turmoil of the Dreyfus affair, Durkheim needed a different language. He needed words that could capture not just duty, but also the human capacity for idealism, for transcending the self, for embracing the good. He needed a vision of society akin to the Pauline Gospel, not just the Mosaic Law. It's like switching from needing strict rules to needing inspiration. And where did he find this vocabulary? It seems he cobbled it together from bits and pieces. Smith's idea of a primitive sacrament offering vitality, and Maret's insights, derived from Codrington and James, about an impersonal force and the will to believe. Alright, so we've traced Durkheim's intellectual journey. But does any of it matter? Was his explanation of totemism true? Well, asking if it's true in the old-fashioned sense accurate representation of mind-independent reality is problematic. First, empirically, the Australian data didn't quite fit Durkheim's model, as noted by Spencer and many later anthropologists. But deeper than that, philosophers like Kuhn, Putnam, Davidson, and Rorty have systematically dismantled the idea that our theories accurately mirror some objective reality out there. Even John Searle, who defends the reality of social facts, admits they're real in a different way than physical facts. Franz Boas was already arguing back in the 1890s that the supposed universality of totemism was an illusion, a projection by anthropologists. And Claude Lévi-Strauss later famously suggested, the whole obsession with totemism was a way for the educated West to feel superior by inventing a primitive other. So the idea of totemism as a single mind-independent reality looks shaky. If truth in the old sense is suspect, what should we ask instead? The text argues we should shift our focus. Less about absolute truth, more about justifying beliefs relative to specific purposes and audiences. Less about objective reality, more about intersubjectivity. How do we reach agreement on descriptions that work for us? And less about beliefs as pictures of reality, more as tools we use in our social practices, including science. Richard Rorty makes a compelling point here. Does science really presuppose the correspondence theory of truth? Or does it just presuppose things like bacteria cause disease? We have consensus on bacteria, but not on correspondence theory. That's why our practices often proceed without worrying too much about deep philosophical foundations. Maybe social science could be better off ditching the quest for epistemological certainty and focusing more on history and practical application. Think about it. If we stop obsessing over whether we're doing hard science or soft humanities, maybe we can actually contribute to improving lives and institutions. So our deep dive into Durkheim's elementary forms reveals a fascinating intellectual journey. From a focus on the constraints of society, he evolved to embrace religion's potential to energize and uplift. This wasn't a straight line, but a dynamic process shaped by intense debates with contemporaries like Fraser, Smith, and Maret, and enriched by ideas from across the Atlantic like pragmatism. Understanding this history reminds us that even the giants of our field were products of their time, wrestling with complex ideas and influences. It also nudges us to reconsider our own assumptions about what makes knowledge valid and how we conduct our research. Thanks for following this exploration.